In our next and final conversation with Mark, we're going to talk about something. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In a previous conversation with historian Dan Vogel, Dan mentioned that visions of Christ were common in Joseph Smith's day. So why would a Methodist minister be upset at Joseph Smith's first vision? I asked that question to Dr. Mark Staker, and he has an idea of what Joseph said that probably did upset the minister. So you won't want to miss this part of our conversation. Check it out. I'm still trying to figure out, because Joseph leaned towards the Methodist sect, which was not his mother or his father. Why do you think that was?
Complex, but I think that they're emphasizing going out and praying for answers. The Presbyterians are a little bit, but not quite to the same extent that the Methodists are. And he's looking for answers, and I think that he's finding in them the encouragement to get those answers. There are a lot of other things about the Methodists that that maybe he was drawn to, but he doesn't give him that kind of information to let us know.
I mean, from what I understand, the first vision was very similar to a lot of Methodist visions. Is that true?
Yes. Yep. Methodists are the ones that are having those kinds of visions. So to an extent, it is kind of a Methodist vision that he has.
You know, I've had some conversations with Dan Vogel and Stephen Harper, and one of the big debates between those two is this idea about what Dan has said in the past, that the first vision was very common among Methodists, and so he takes issue with Joseph saying that it was a Methodist minister that took issue with the first vision. He said that would have been a very normal Methodist experience. But Stephen Harper has said that he does believe, because I actually asked Stephen, I said, wouldn't it make more sense that a Presbyterian minister would have poo-pooed the first vision or whatever? Can you weigh in on that controversy?
I can. There is a minister out in Ohio who Joseph Smith tells him about his first experiences, and he later dismisses it in his own writing, saying it was just like an old Methodist lady. So he saw it as equivalent. Nothing different than the Methodists are doing, and for good reason, because they were having very similar experiences. Joseph's is different than anybody's in some critical ways, and one of those I talk about in my earlier book, Hearken, O Ye People, when I'm trying to explain there Joseph's response to similar experiences in Kirtland, and how could he respond to those after he had had his own vision. But what we learn from looking really carefully at everything Joseph says, he talks about the power. The power fell upon me, and he uses that word 9 times in one of his accounts of the first vision. Well, if you look at what these Methodist ministers are saying, they say that the power is going to fall on you. And they're using that exact same word. It's going to bind your tongue so you can't speak. And that's going to be God's interaction with you. And you'll know when that happens that God has come to you and he's confirmed to you the things that we say are true. Well, George Lane, a very prominent Methodist minister of the area, as I looked through his family journals, one of his adopted daughters says exactly that thing, that she spins around and she falls to the ground and the power has fallen on her, and she says, "Oh, glory, glory." And Joseph goes to the woods then, and he begins to pray. And what happens? The power falls on him. He says, an unseen power comes to me that binds my tongue so I can't speak. Exactly what the ministers are telling him is going to happens. And what does he do? He prays that God will release him from this power. And no sooner does he pray that God, asking God to release him from this power, that he sees a light. And then he sees the Father. The Father introduces the Son to him and tells him, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." Well, the difference between Joseph and all those Methodists who had exactly that same experience was that Joseph recognized that that power was not what he wanted, that it was not of God. And no sooner did he recognize that and ask to be delivered from that, than he has an experience unlike any experience that anybody else has had. And that's what made him different than everybody else. Imagine when he goes back and tells a Methodist minister, "I went out and began to pray, and you know that power you told me was going to fall on me? That's the devil." Is that Methodist minister going to like that? No. He is going to, naturally he's going to condemn that.
Oh.
Because that's critical of everything he's been teaching people and telling them to go out and experience. And imagine that he then says, "And then God, the Father, and Jesus Christ came and appeared to me." That's going to contradict all these others who've been saying that we don't have visions like that these days. And so both of those extremes, Joseph's experience counters and contradicts, and that everybody is not going to like him when he begins telling about those details, which is why he waits for so many years to do so, because the initial experience was so negative.
So you would agree with Stephen Harper that it was a Methodist minister that condemned him?
That's the minister that he would know. That's the one that he would go to, and we know of some of those ministers that were in the area that spring in 1820 that he could possibly have gone to.
I don't want to go too far into there, but I am curious also, there's the issue, Wesley Walters said there was no evidence of revivals in 1820. Stephen Harper kind of disputes that a little bit. Where do you stand?
There are revivals going on all around there, but Joseph never said a revival. What did he say? A great excitement on the subject of religion. There's a huge debate going on right at that time between the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and it was primarily between the Methodists and the Baptists. The Presbyterians get briefly involved and then kind of pull out of that. But apparently thousands of people are going to these big debates that are going on. And there's a series of letters going back and forth. Those letters survive in the Syracuse University archives. I've found them and gone through those to try to figure out what these debates were all about. They centered on baptism and whether you need baptism or not, and kind of the nature of that. And you can imagine a young boy going to these big debates, apparently very critical, very condemnatory, if that's a word, experiences that are really fighting against one another. And that's why the Presbyterian minister says, "Hey, you do these debates and you're going to hurt the cause of religion in general." He seems to kind of pull back and not want to be involved in all of it because of that. But some real bitter attacks between the Methodists and the Baptists that are going on right there at that time in that place.
Interesting. All right. Well, so let's jump back to the farm, the site. So this is kind of an ongoing archaeological dig, then, or?
Yeah, we did what we could with that grant and in that time period, but there's more that needs to be done. And hoping that we can do a pollen study, and then eventually we can get back and we can do another dig and look at the whole site larger. It'll tell us a lot of things that this one hasn't told us.
So, is there like a GoFundMe? Because this is more of a private thing than the church is sponsoring it. Is that right?
Right. Yep. This is a private thing. When we released the book, there was a big push during that first release saying, "Oh, you ought to do a GoFundMe account. We will contribute money to do this pollen study." I'm trying the grant route first. I'd rather that it all came from one source, and kind of easier to address. And so we're hoping that can do it. But maybe at some point we could do a GoFundMe account to do a second dig and go out and learn more about the site. But we're not quite there yet. I've got another book that we're trying to finish together. Dawn and I are working on, and we'll get that out. And then.
So there's a sequel coming up, is what you're telling us.
There's a sequel coming up that looks at primarily the Smith family in New York. Dawn's 70 years of research and my 30 years of research on the family there. We're combining, trying to pull together into a narrative account of that experience. And this is all background to that, kind of leading into that story.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to share with us on the dig or about your book?
No. I hope you enjoy it. An anonymous reviewer looked through it when I submitted it. Actually, as an article first. I said, "Well, let's publish it." It was just too long for an article. We didn't want to cut anything out, so we expanded it a bit to make it into a book. And that person said, "Well, when I knew I had to review an archaeological dig report, I thought, oh yay," and they were quite surprised that it was informative and in places entertaining. And so I'm hoping that people will find that in it. It's an archaeological report because we want to be able to cite it in later material, but it's written in a way that there's a lot of new data here about the family.
Right.
And it's informative in terms of that early Vermont period.
Yeah. Are you going out again this summer to do any digging or?
Nope. I'm going to focus on that other book and get that one done, and we'll keep working on that.
All right. Well, and I guess we should say, actually, I want to ask one more question, because you're a bishop, right?
I am, yes.
So I guess we can call you Dr. Bishop Mark Staker, right?
Yeah. One of my priests used to call me that.
I just had a Facebook conversation, and the person said, 75 to 80% of people who study church history lose their testimony. And I, of course, disagreed with him on that, and cited people like you. So can you comment on that? Can you study church history and still be a faithful person?
Absolutely, you can. I find that it increases my faith.
Yeah.
And it raises questions in my mind that finding the answers to those questions actually adds insight and understanding into how God works and the nature of the restoration. Sometimes we grow up with assumptions about things, and we find as we study church history that those assumptions were wrong. And some people see that means that everything that they thought was wrong because they assumed these certain things, that was wrong, and therefore their religion's wrong. And I've found in my own experience that no, my assumptions were wrong, and that I need to rethink those assumptions and understand more deeply how God works.
Well, and since you mentioned Joseph Sr. growing hops, hops obviously is used in making beer, and clearly this is before the word of wisdom. Should we be embarrassed about, Joseph growing hops?
Lucy Mack Smith grew up in a family that had a tavern. Her sister inherits a tavern with her husband, and they continue to run it in New Hampshire. When she gets to Palmyra and the family's desperate for money, they make a portable tavern where they're going, and some of her children and perhaps her husband are selling beer and other things at these big public events. Later, when she gets to far west Missouri, and she describes to the census taker her profession, she says she's a tavern runner, that she runs taverns, that's her business. She grows up with that. What that tells me is that the word of wisdom had a big impact on her when it comes. It had a big impact on a lot of people. She smoked tobacco. So did most of her family. When the word of wisdom was received and Joseph Smith goes in the other room to read it, everybody in that room but one individual had a pipe at that time that they were smoking, and they all stood up and threw in the fireplace. Well, 3 people in that room were members of his own family. So we know that at least 2 of those people had a pipe in their hand. And I suspect all 3 of them did. I think it was somebody else who didn't have the pipe. So the word of wisdom had a big impact on their lives, and they changed their lives as a result of it. We wouldn't want them to have known everything about the gospel before the gospel was restored, because that was the whole nature of the restoration, to teach us things through the Holy Ghost and through revelation that we didn't know beforehand, and they didn't know those things. So we would expect them to have drank beer. We know that they drank beer and cider. That was part of their lives. It was seen as there lots of things written at the time about Gin Alley or Beer Street. That drinking beer was considered a moral, upright, respectable thing to do. Gin Alley was kind of the people that were out drinking gin or other things that weren't as good and for you, and were immoral to an extent.
Because gin would be considered more of hard liquor,
yeah,
where beer would not be.
Exactly.
A mild barley drink.
So, well, and the word of wisdom says what? Drinks out of barley are okay. Well, what kind of drinks? It looks like if you read it from the time period that it was saying that beer was okay then. Now, we've received additional revelation since, and it's not okay for Latter-day Saints today, but I would expect that folks in Kirtland continue to drink beer because the word of wisdom says that they can. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that they grew hops, and that was part of the family money.
Well, great. All right. Well, anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Bishop Dr. Mark Staker. It's great having you here on Gospel Tangents.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed your time.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Mark Staker. Mark, thanks for sitting down with me and talking about your fantastic new book, Joseph and Lucy Smith's Tunbridge Farm. Encourage you all to go out and check it out. It's a fantastic book, and you'll learn more about the farm and some of the things that relate to Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. So it's a fantastic book. You should check it out. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have another return guest back on the show, Dr. Margaret Toscano. We're going to see what we're going to talk about with her.
What else can I say? I have to say, and maybe I won't have enough strengths. I mean, on the one hand, I think I can say that I think that, that this essay is very well intentioned. It's, even though I disagree with some basic premises of the essay, I feel like that the authors are, and of course we don't know exactly who wrote it. I have a couple of suspicions, but I think that they're trying to do a good job to explain how Joseph Smith's words fit in with what we have today.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, gospeltangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website for For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, gospeltangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at Amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. Get our latest updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.